At 1:47 in the morning, the digital eye watching over a quiet home in the Arizona desert went blind. The stream of data from a doorbell camera, a silent sentinel mounted near the front door, abruptly ceased. The connection was severed, the footage cut to black, and an impenetrable wall of digital silence fell over the property. For the next 41 minutes, the house at 5830 North Jenna Drive was a ghost on the network, invisible to the outside world. But inside that void, something was happening. Another device, a small and sophisticated piece of medical technology implanted inside the chest of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, continued its work. It was a pacemaker, a device designed to regulate the rhythm of her heart. Yet modern pacemakers are more than just regulators, they are data recorders. And this one was still logging information, still connected to an application on her phone. Then, at 2:28 in the morning, that final thread was cut. The pacemaker's application stopped communicating. The last digital echo from within the house vanished. 41 minutes, a gap in time, bookended by two digital events. A window of darkness during which a woman disappeared from her home, from her life, and from the world that knew her. What happened inside those 41 minutes is the central question in a case that has baffled investigators and captured the nation's attention. The answers are not simple, and the evidence is a complex tapestry of digital footprints and forensic science. This is the story of what we know, based on the facts that have been painstakingly pieced together by law enforcement. This is Time and Crime. If you believe in a careful and factual approach to true crime, and you want to understand the evidence in the cases that matter, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us continue to do this work the way it deserves to be done. Today, we are examining the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, not through the lens of speculation, but through the documented timeline and the verified evidence released by the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We will walk through the last known hours of her life, the discovery of her absence, and the critical clues left behind at the scene. By the end of this, you will understand the framework of the investigation and the chilling questions that remain unanswered. Before we delve into the technical details and the forensic evidence, it is essential to understand who Nancy Guthrie was. She was not a public figure, and by all accounts, she never sought the spotlight that shone so brightly on her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, the celebrated anchor of NBC's Today Show. Nancy was a mother, a grandmother, and a resident of Tucson, Arizona, where she lived a quiet and private life. Born Nancy Ann Sykes, she built a life centered on family and faith. After the tragic death of her husband, Charles Guthrie, when their children were still young, she faced the immense challenge of raising them largely on her own. It was a testament to her resilience and dedication that she navigated such a profound loss while providing a stable and loving home. People who knew her described a woman of quiet strength and gentle habits. She found joy in her garden, was a regular presence at her church, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of a peaceful evening on her porch in the Catalina foothills. Her neighborhood was known for its tranquility, a sprawling, affluent area where the rugged beauty of the Sonoran Desert meets suburban comfort. It was the kind of place where residents felt a sense of security, where the rustle of desert wildlife was a more common sound in the dead of night than the footsteps of an intruder. Nancy's life was one of routine and familiarity. At 84 years old, she faced the health challenges that often accompany age. She had a heart condition that required daily medication, and her mobility was limited. To help manage her cardiac health, she was fitted with a pacemaker. This device, while a marker of her medical vulnerability, would later become a central and perplexing piece of the investigative puzzle. She was, by all official accounts, a vulnerable adult, yet her mind was sharp. Her family and authorities have been clear on this point. Nancy was not someone who would have simply wandered off. She was not prone to confusion or disorientation. Her disappearance was not a case of a person lost to the fog of age, but rather the result of an external force that entered her life with devastating consequences. The last day of normalcy for Nancy Guthrie was Saturday, January 31st, 2026. It was a day that began like any other but ended at the precipice of a mystery. That evening, she had dinner with family. Public records and official statements from law enforcement allow us to construct a precise timeline of her movements. At 5:32 in the evening, an Uber was dispatched to her home. The digital record of the ride-sharing service provides a time-stamped, GPS-verified starting point for her final journey out into the world. She was taken to a family dinner, an occasion for connection and shared time, the kind of routine event that forms the bedrock of family life. Hours later, after the dinner concluded, a family member drove her home. At 9:48 in the evening, she arrived back at her residence on North Jenna Drive. A sensor on her garage door logged its opening, another small, impersonal piece of data that would later become a critical anchor point in the timeline. At 9:50 in the evening, just 2 minutes later, the garage door closed. This is the last confirmed moment of any normal, voluntary activity at the Guthrie residence. The closing of that door marked the end of her known interactions with the outside world. From that point forward, Nancy was inside her home, presumably settling in for the night. For nearly 4 hours, the house was quiet. The digital sentinels that surrounded it, the doorbell camera, the home security sensors, the network-connected devices recorded nothing out of the ordinary. The neighborhood outside slumbered under the vast, dark Arizona sky. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, the first anomaly occurred. The doorbell camera at her front door, a device that had been faithfully recording and uploading footage to a cloud server, went offline. It wasn't a power outage. Other systems in the house remained active. It was a targeted disconnection. The digital eye was blinded. This single event marks the official start of the criminal investigation. It is the moment that investigators believe an unknown individual or individuals began to act. Just over half an hour later, at 2:12 in the morning, the camera's software registered a motion event. However, with the camera itself disabled, no usable footage was captured. Authorities have noted that this alert could have been triggered by anything, an animal, the wind, or a person moving in the darkness. It is a frustrating and ambiguous piece of data, a digital ghost in the machine. Then came the second critical timestamp. At 2:28 in the morning, the connection between Nancy's pacemaker and the monitoring application on her smartphone was severed. This 41-minute window, from 1:47 to 2:28, is the black box at the heart of this case. It is the period during which investigators believe Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home against her will. The next morning, Sunday, February 1st, the quiet routine of Nancy's life was expected to continue. She had plans, commitments that her family was aware of. When she failed to show up as expected, and when calls to her phone went unanswered, a seed of concern was planted. That concern grew throughout the morning. It is a scenario familiar to anyone with an elderly parent or relative who lives alone. A missed call, a deviation from routine, can quickly escalate from a minor worry to a pressing fear. By late morning, the family knew something was wrong. At 11:56 a.m., and a family member arrived at the house to check on her. What they found transformed fear into alarm. The scene inside the house was unsettling. While there were no overt signs of a violent struggle, there were subtle and disturbing clues that this was not a simple case of a missing person. Nancy's purse was still in the house. Her phone was there as well. These are the essential items that a person, especially an elderly woman, would never voluntarily leave behind. Their presence was a silent, powerful argument against the theory that she had left on her own. Furthermore, a back door was found propped open, an unusual and ominous detail that suggested a potential point of entry or exit for someone unfamiliar with the home's normal state. The picture was becoming clearer and more frightening. This was not a woman who had gone for a walk and become disoriented. This was a home that had been breached. At 12:03 in the afternoon, a 911 call was placed. The operator on the other end would have heard the strained voice of a family member reporting a missing 84-year-old woman under suspicious circumstances. That call set in motion the official response. At 12:15 p.m., deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at the residence. Their initial assessment of the scene quickly confirmed the family's fears. This was not a standard welfare check. The combination of the victim's age, her medical vulnerabilities, the items left behind, and the open door immediately elevated the situation. The deputies secured the property, preserving it as a potential crime scene, and the investigation began in earnest. Within days, the public messaging from law enforcement became stark and unequivocal. On February 2nd, Sheriff Chris Nanos held a press conference. He did not mince words. He stated that investigators believed Nancy Guthrie had been kidnapped or abducted. The word kidnapped carries immense legal and investigative weight. It shifts the entire focus of the operation from search and rescue to a major crimes investigation, one that involves the possibility of ransom demands, interstate flight, and a level of criminal sophistication far beyond a simple burglary or assault. The sheriff's announcement was a clear signal to the public and to the perpetrators. This was being treated as a violent crime committed against a vulnerable person. The evidence that led to this conclusion was mounting. Investigators had conducted a meticulous examination of the property. The most significant and disturbing discovery was made on the porch. There they found blood. Forensic analysis was expedited, and the DNA profile extracted from the blood was a match to Nancy Guthrie. This was a game changer. It was concrete, irrefutable proof that a violent event had occurred. The presence of her blood outside the home suggested a struggle or an injury that happened at or near an exit point. It shattered any lingering hope that this was a misunderstanding or a non-violent event. It confirmed that Nancy had been harmed. The investigation expanded rapidly. Given the nature of the crime, a potential kidnapping, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was brought in to assist the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The FBI contributed its vast resources, including specialized forensic teams, behavioral analysis units, and a nationwide network of intelligence assets. The case was no longer just a local Tucson crime. It was a federal investigation of the highest priority. A reward for information was announced, initially a significant sum that would later be increased as the search for answers intensified. Investigators began to work every possible angle. They canvassed the neighborhood, seeking witnesses who might have seen or heard something unusual in the early hours of February 1st. But the Catalina foothills, with its large properties and quiet, winding streets, is not a place with heavy foot traffic or numerous potential observers, especially in the middle of the night. The perpetrator had chosen the time and place well, exploiting the inherent privacy and isolation of the neighborhood. The digital evidence, however, offered more promising leads. While the doorbell camera had been disabled, its cloud storage contained the crucial footage from the moments just before it went dark. On February 10th, the FBI took the extraordinary step of releasing recovered images and a short video clip to the public. The images were chilling. They showed a masked individual, armed with what appeared to be a handgun, approaching the front door. The person was dressed in dark clothing and appeared to be tampering with the camera. The footage was grainy, captured in the low light of the pre-dawn hours. But it provided the first visual confirmation of a suspect. It was no longer an abstract theory. There was a face, albeit one hidden behind a mask, attached to this crime. The FBI's public release included a more detailed description of the suspect. They described the person as being approximately 5'9" to 5'10" tall, with an average build. The individual was carrying a black backpack, which was later identified with remarkable specificity as a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. This level of detail is significant. The Ozark Trail brand is a common and inexpensive line of outdoor gear sold at major retailers like Walmart. The specificity of the model suggested that investigators had a clear enough image to identify it, but its common nature also meant that it would be incredibly difficult to trace. It was a piece of equipment chosen for its utility and its anonymity. The release of this information served a dual purpose: to solicit tips from the public who might recognize the individual or the distinctive backpack, and to send a message to the perpetrator that they had been seen. As the search for Nancy continued, another piece of physical evidence emerged. About 2 miles from her home, a pair of gloves was discovered. In a high-stakes investigation, any item found discarded near a crime scene is treated with immense suspicion. The gloves were collected and sent for forensic analysis. The hope was that they might contain DNA from the suspect, a so-called touch DNA profile left behind from skin cells. The results, however, were another frustrating dead end. On February 17th, officials announced that while DNA was recovered from the gloves, it did not produce a match in the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. CODIS is the national database containing DNA profiles of convicted felons and other individuals arrested for serious crimes. A non-match meant that the person who wore the gloves was either not in the system or the gloves were unrelated to the crime. It was another lead that turned cold. While one team of investigators focused on the physical and digital evidence, another group turned its attention to the most unique element of the case: Nancy's pacemaker. They began working with the device's manufacturer and with forensic cardiac specialists. The initial goal was not to decode the data stored within the device, but to locate it. Modern pacemakers, especially those with remote monitoring capabilities, emit a low-level radio frequency signal. The investigators explored the possibility of using specialized equipment to detect this signal, a process sometimes referred to as using a signal sniffer. Reports from the time indicated that they deployed a helicopter equipped with such a device, flying over vast swaths of the Arizona desert in the hopes of picking up a faint pulse of data from the pacemaker. It was a search for a digital needle in a geographic haystack. The effort underscored the desperation and the innovative thinking that characterized the investigation. They were chasing every conceivable lead, no matter how technologically challenging. The public, meanwhile, was left to grapple with the terrifying narrative that had emerged. An elderly woman had been violently abducted from her home in the middle of the night by an armed, masked intruder. The crime was planned and executed with a chilling degree of precision. The suspect knew to disable the camera. They came prepared with a backpack, suggesting they intended to carry items away from the scene, or perhaps carry tools needed for the abduction itself. They chose a time and location that maximized their chances of not being seen, and they left behind just enough evidence to confirm the violent nature of the crime, but not enough to be immediately identified. The family, thrust into an unimaginable nightmare, made public pleas for Nancy's safe return. Savannah Guthrie, using her national platform, spoke with raw emotion about her mother, describing her as a person of deep faith and gentle spirit. She appealed directly to the kidnapper, or anyone who might know their whereabouts, begging them to come forward and provide information that could lead to her mother's recovery. The family also worked to correct the record on one crucial point. They made it clear that they had been ruled out as suspects by investigators. This is a standard, if painful, part of any such investigation. Law enforcement must, as a matter of procedure, look at those closest to the victim before widening the circle of suspicion. The public confirmation that the family was not involved allowed the focus to remain squarely on the unknown intruder seen in the doorbell camera footage. The reward for information leading to Nancy's whereabouts or the arrest of the person responsible was increased to $100,000. The FBI's involvement, the significant reward, and the high-profile nature of the victim's family ensured that the case remained in the national spotlight. But despite the intense media coverage and the massive law enforcement effort, the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing day. The 41-minute window between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning remained an opaque void. Let us return to that window and what the two timestamps bounding it truly represent. The first, 1:47 a.m. In the camera disconnection is the moment of intrusion. It is the action of a perpetrator who is technologically aware. Disabling a modern cloud-connected security camera is not as simple as cutting a wire. It often involves disrupting the local Wi-Fi network or using a specific tool to jam the signal. This action speaks to a level of planning and preparation that is deeply unsettling. It suggests the intruder had at least a working knowledge of home security systems and took steps to neutralize the primary electronic witness before making their move. The second timestamp, 2:28 a.m. The Pacemaker app disconnection is more complex and, in many ways, more mysterious. A pacemaker's remote monitoring system typically works by the implanted device communicating via a low-frequency signal to a nearby receiver. This receiver can be a dedicated home monitoring unit plugged into the wall, or, as is increasingly common, a smartphone application. The app on the phone receives the data from the pacemaker and then uses the phone's cellular or Wi-Fi connection to transmit it to a secure server managed by the device manufacturer. The disconnection at 2:28 means that the chain of communication was broken. This could happen for several reasons. The phone could have been powered off. It could have been destroyed. Or it could have been moved out of the limited range of the pacemaker's signal. Or the pacemaker itself could have been moved out of the phone's range. Given that Nancy's phone was found inside the house, the most logical conclusion drawn by investigators is that the pacemaker, and therefore Nancy herself, was no longer in proximity to her phone. This timestamp is the likely moment that Nancy Guthrie was physically removed from her home. So, the 41 minutes represent the time the intruder was inside the property with Nancy before leaving. 41 minutes. It is a period of time that feels both fleeting and eternal. What happens in 41 minutes? It is long enough to search a home, to confront a victim, to subdue them, and to remove them from the premises. It is a terrifyingly long time for a person to be at the mercy of a violent intruder. The sustained period suggests that this was not a quick smash-and-grab burglary that went wrong. It points to a more deliberate and methodical series of actions. The intruder was not in a rush. They felt secure enough in their anonymity, in the darkness of the night and the silence of the neighborhood, to spend more than half an hour inside the home of their victim. The evidence paints a portrait of a predator who was both careful and brazen. They were careful enough to mask their identity and disable the camera. They were brazen enough to arm themselves and force their way into an occupied home. They were knowledgeable enough to understand the basics of home security, yet they may have been unaware of the secondary digital trail being created by the pacemaker's connection to the phone. Or perhaps they simply did not care. The psychological profile of such an individual is complex. Is this a person motivated by money, expecting a ransom given the family's public profile? Is it someone with a personal grudge against the family? Or is it a random act of violence, a crime of opportunity committed by someone who saw a vulnerable target? These are the questions that the FBI's behavioral analysts would have been grappling with as they examined the case file. The physical evidence recovered, the blood on the porch, the gloves found 2 miles away, the specific type of backpack, are the tangible artifacts of the crime. Each one is a potential source of clues. The blood provided a DNA confirmation of the victim's identity and proved that violence occurred. The gloves, despite not matching anyone in the CODIS database, still hold potential. The DNA found on them could be matched to a suspect if one is ever identified through other means. It is a piece of the puzzle held in reserve. The backpack is a public-facing clue, an item that a friend, a family member, or a casual acquaintance might recognize. It is a specific and unusual choice for a person committing a home invasion, more suited to a day hiker than a burglar. Does its presence suggest something about the suspect's lifestyle or habits? Or was it chosen purely for its utility in carrying tools or other items? As the first part of this investigation concludes, we are left with a clear but incomplete picture. We have a beloved 84-year-old woman, medically vulnerable but mentally sharp, who was violently abducted from her home. We have a precise timeline of her last known normal movements and a 41-minute window during which the crime occurred. We have a digital image of the armed and masked perpetrator, a specific description of their build and the equipment they carried. We have forensic evidence confirming a violent encounter. And we have a massive multi-agency investigation that, despite its resources and intensity, has not yet been able to locate Nancy or identify her abductor. The silence from the perpetrator is deafening. There have been no credible public claims of responsibility, no ransom demands that have been officially confirmed. There is only the void left by Nancy's absence and the lingering chill of the evidence left behind. The story is far from over. The data from the pacemaker, the ongoing forensic analysis, and the tireless work of investigators would continue to shape the search for answers. The questions that remain are the ones that haunt this case. Who was the man in the mask? Was he acting alone? What was his motive? And the most important and painful question of all, where is Nancy Guthrie? The facts as we know them have laid the foundation. They have drawn the blueprint of a crime that is as methodical as it is brutal. Thank you for joining us on Time and Crime for this detailed examination of the evidence. If you value this factual approach to storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. In the next part of this special report, we will go deeper into the more complex and controversial aspects of the evidence, exploring what else the technology may have revealed and the paths the investigation took in the weeks and months that followed that terrible night in the Arizona desert. Welcome back to Time and Crime. In the first part of our investigation, we established the factual timeline of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. We detailed how an 84-year-old woman was taken from her Tucson home in the dead of night, leaving behind a 41-minute window of digital silence. That window began at 1:47 a.m., when her doorbell camera was disabled, and it ended at 2:28 a.m., when the application monitoring her cardiac pacemaker lost its connection. We traced the initial discovery of the crime, the signs of forced entry, and the chilling confirmation of violence, Nancy's blood found on her own porch. We also saw the image of the armed, masked intruder, a ghost captured in the camera's final moments. Now, we move forward into the complex and often misunderstood aftermath. We will examine the technological hunt for Nancy, the cutting-edge forensic science being brought to bear on the case, and the expert theories that attempt to build a profile of the person or people responsible. This is the story of what happened after the 41-minute window closed, the search, the science, and the lingering, agonizing questions. One of the most persistent points of confusion in the public narrative surrounding this case is the event at 2:28 in the morning. Many early reports incorrectly stated that Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped at this time. This is a critical misunderstanding of the technology involved. The pacemaker itself, a self-contained medical device implanted in her chest, did not stop functioning. What stopped was its ability to communicate with the outside world. The data sync, the wireless handshake between the pacemaker and the monitoring application on her smartphone, was broken. The most logical reason for this, given that her phone was found inside the house, is distance. The low-energy Bluetooth signal that connects a pacemaker to its monitoring device has a very limited range, typically no more than 30 feet. At 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker was likely carried beyond that range. This timestamp does not mark the moment of Nancy's death. On the contrary, it is the moment that confirms her movement away from the scene. It is the digital echo of her abduction. She was, in all probability, alive at that moment, a passenger against her will, being transported into the darkness. The heart inside her chest was still beating, and the device tasked with protecting it was still working, still logging data, but its voice had been silenced. This fact, that the pacemaker was still active but no longer transmitting, created an immense challenge for investigators. They had a missing person with an active electronic device inside her body, but they had no way to hear it. This triggered one of the most technologically ambitious search efforts in recent memory. Law enforcement began a massive operation to try and detect the pacemaker's faint Bluetooth signal. This is not science fiction. It is a real, though incredibly difficult, investigative technique. Specialized devices, often called signal sniffers, were deployed. These are highly sensitive receivers calibrated to listen for the specific frequency and signature of a particular Bluetooth broadcast. Investigators from the FBI, working with technical experts and the device manufacturer, began a systematic sweep. The challenge is one of scale. The pacemaker's signal is designed for close proximity, for a doctor's office or a bedside monitor. It is not a GPS tracker. It does not broadcast its location to a satellite. To find it, a receiver must come within its small bubble of transmission, that 15 to 30-foot range. This meant that investigators couldn't simply scan the state of Arizona. They had to physically move a detector through a specific geographic area, hoping for a fleeting digital handshake. This turned the search into a painstaking grid-by-grid process. Helicopters were reportedly equipped with this technology, flying low over the rugged terrain of the Sonoran Desert, while ground teams and vehicles may have been deployed with similar equipment, sweeping through residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and desolate stretches of highway. They were listening for a whisper in a hurricane of other electronic noise. Every modern car, every home, every person carrying a smartphone floods the airwaves with Bluetooth signals. The task was to isolate one specific signal belonging to one specific pacemaker from that ocean of data. The search area was vast, the target was microscopic, and the clock was ticking. While one part of the investigation was focused on finding Nancy in the present, another was digging deep into the past, into the moments she was taken, through the microscopic traces left behind by her abductor. The crime scene at North Jenna Drive had been processed with meticulous care. Forensic teams collected every potential piece of evidence, no matter how small. Among the items recovered were biological samples that held the potential to break the case wide open. Specifically, investigators announced they had recovered a rootless hair sample from within the home, as well as biological material from a clipping taken from a bedsheet. These items were not sent to a standard crime lab. They were sent to the FBI's legendary laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, the most advanced forensic facility in the country, and they were earmarked for a revolutionary type of analysis. The evidence was handed over to a partnership of two of the most respected names in modern forensics. The first is Othram, a private laboratory based in Texas that has pioneered techniques for analyzing trace amounts of degraded or complex DNA mixtures. The second is C.C. Moore, a forensic genealogist who is widely regarded as the nation's leading expert in using genetic genealogy to solve cold cases. This partnership represents the absolute cutting edge of forensic science. A rootless hair, for example, contains very little nuclear DNA, the kind traditionally used for criminal identification. For decades, such a sample would have been of limited value. But labs like Othram specialize in extracting usable profiles from what is known as low copy number DNA, amplifying tiny fragments into a workable genetic sequence. Once a profile is generated, C.C. Moore's work begins. She takes the unknown DNA profile and uploads it to public genealogy databases, such as GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. These are services where ordinary citizens have voluntarily uploaded their own DNA profiles to find relatives and build family trees. If the suspect's DNA profile matches even a distant cousin in one of these databases, Moore can use her expertise to reverse engineer a family tree, identifying common ancestors, and building the lineage down until she can identify a likely candidate for the source of the DNA. This is the technique that has solved dozens of decades-old cold cases, identifying notorious criminals like the Golden State Killer. The involvement of Othram and Cece Moore was a clear statement from the FBI. They were pursuing a definitive identification of the person who was inside Nancy Guthrie's home, and they were using the most powerful tools available to do it. The hope was that the hair left on a bedsheet would become the suspect's undoing, a biological signature that could lead investigators directly to their name. However, this high-tech pursuit of the suspect's identity was not without its own real-world complications. In the early, critical weeks of the investigation, a significant point of public confusion arose, suggesting a degree of friction between the local and federal agencies handling the case. In a televised press conference, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos was asked directly about the DNA evidence. He stated that the DNA had been sent to a lab in Florida. This statement directly contradicted information from the FBI, which had indicated the evidence was at, or on its way to, Quantico. Two different labs, two different states, two different stories. This public discrepancy raised serious questions about the coordination of the investigation. In a case of this magnitude, where a unified command structure is essential, any hint of jurisdictional disagreement or miscommunication is a cause for concern. This kind of friction is not entirely uncommon in joint operations between local sheriff's departments and federal agencies. Both have their own procedures, their own preferred laboratories, and their own chains of command. But in a kidnapping case involving a vulnerable elderly woman, time is the most critical variable. Every day that passes, the chances of a successful recovery diminish. The process of sending evidence to one lab only to have it rerouted to another costs time. The weeks spent waiting for analysis from one facility could have been used by another. While the DNA did eventually end up in the right hands at Quantico, the initial confusion surrounding its path was a troubling development. It suggested that the seamless collaboration necessary for a rapid resolution was not fully in place from the outset. It was a bureaucratic hurdle in a race against time, a race that Nancy Guthrie could not afford to lose. As the forensic and technological searches continued, another group of experts was working to build a picture of the person behind the crime. In May of 2026, the CW network aired a special report on the case, titled The Nancy Guthrie Mystery. The program brought together a panel of highly credentialed criminal investigation experts to analyze the known facts. The panel included Dr. Ann Burgess, a pioneering criminal profiler from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, whose work was a key inspiration for the Netflix series Mindhunter. She was joined by Dr. Gary Brucato, a forensic psychologist and expert on targeted violence, and Dr. Casey Jordan, a criminologist and behavioral analyst. These are individuals who have spent their careers studying the minds and methods of violent criminals. And all three of them, after reviewing the evidence, came to a similar and deeply disturbing conclusion. They theorized that the abduction of Nancy Guthrie was likely not the work of a single individual acting alone. They proposed a two-person model for the crime. The first person is the man seen on the doorbell camera, the armed and masked intruder they referred to as Porch Guy. This individual was the operative, the hands-on perpetrator who breached the home, disabled the camera, and physically abducted Nancy. But the experts believed he was not the mastermind. They argued that the level of planning, the specific knowledge of the camera system, and the overall execution of the crime pointed to a second, unseen figure, a person they called the boss. This individual would be the architect of the crime, the one who planned the operation, selected the target, and gave the instructions. Then, they added a chilling layer to their theory. They suggested that Porch Guy may have been a disposable asset. They raised the strong possibility that the person who hired him may have already eliminated him to sever the only link back to them. If the operative is dead, he cannot be arrested, he cannot be interrogated, and he cannot identify the person who was pulling the strings. This theory, if correct, changes the entire psychological profile of the main perpetrator. It suggests a level of ruthlessness and foresight that is characteristic of organized professional criminality. This is not a panicked burglar or a disorganized offender. This is a person who engages in calculated risk management and who sees another human life as a loose end to be tied up. The boss is not just a kidnapper. They are a manager, making cold, logical decisions to ensure their own survival, even after the primary crime has been committed. This profile is of someone who is not panicking but is actively managing the fallout, confident in their ability to remain in the shadows. While investigators and experts were dealing with these complex theories, they also had to contend with the inevitable noise and deliberate misdirection that surrounds any high-profile case. On April 6, the 65th day of the investigation, the celebrity news website TMZ received two anonymous notes. The notes were sent on the same morning from the same source. The first note claimed that Nancy Guthrie was dead. The second, sent shortly after, claimed that the sender had seen her alive in Sonora, Mexico. The two notes were in direct contradiction with each other. One claimed death, the other claimed a recent sighting. This internal inconsistency was an immediate red flag. Retired FBI agents and other law enforcement analysts who reviewed the notes publicly dismissed them as fraudulent, a cruel and pointless hoax designed to attract attention or to muddy the investigative waters. The contradictory nature of the notes was evidence enough of their unreliability, but they were also contradicted by the hard medical evidence that the FBI possessed. The person who wrote the notes was guessing. They were throwing darts at a board, hoping to create chaos. They were not working from a position of knowledge. They were simply another distraction, another false trail that investigators had to spend time and resources acknowledging and dismissing, time that could have been better spent on pursuing legitimate leads. The incident was a stark reminder that in the modern media landscape, an investigation is not just a search for a victim. It is also a battle against a tide of misinformation. So where does this leave the investigation? We have multiple parallel threads being pursued with the full force of federal law enforcement. We have the search for the Pacemaker's signal, a high-tech hunt for a whisper of data in the desert. We have the DNA analysis at Quantico, where the world's best forensic minds are working to put a name to the biological material left at the scene. We have the expert profiling that suggests a cold, calculating mastermind is behind the entire operation. And we have the constant grinding work of following up on tips, debunking hoaxes, and re-examining every piece of evidence. It is crucial, however, to be honest about the limits of the technology that has become so central to this story. The pacemaker, for all its sophistication, is not a magic bullet. It has provided a timeline. It has confirmed movement, but it cannot on its own solve the case. The device does not have a GPS chip. It cannot transmit its coordinates. The data it has continued to log since 2:28 a.m. On February 1st, a complete physiological diary of everything Nancy has experienced is stored in its internal memory. That memory can only be accessed by placing a clinical programming device in close proximity to it. To read the full story that the pacemaker has written, investigators must first find Nancy. The data log is a locked book, and Nancy Guthrie holds the only key. And so we are left with the most human and heartbreaking element of this entire story. An 84-year-old woman, a mother and grandmother, remains missing. The clock inside her chest, the small device that has been so meticulously analyzed, continues to run. It has been logging her heartbeats, her rhythms, her body's responses to the unimaginable ordeal she has endured every second of every day since she was taken. That data contains the truth. It holds a record of her journey, her state of health, and her moments of fear and calm. It is the most intimate and detailed witness to this crime, and it is still with her. The FBI may have found a disturbing pattern in the data they could access, but the full story, the complete truth, is still out there, with Nancy. The investigation is not cold. The DNA analysis at Quantico is active. The search for the Bluetooth signal, guided by the likely travel radius, continues. The procurement trail for any potential chemical agents is an active investigative thread. And the hunt for the boss, the architect of this nefarious plot, is the central focus of the federal case. The FBI does not use words like nefarious lightly. It is a term that implies a deep and premeditated evil. Their use of that word signals that they already have reason to believe this was not a random act, but a planned conspiracy. The pacemaker data gave them the timeline. The DNA at Quantico may give them the name. But only finding Nancy can bring the full truth to light and deliver the justice she and her family so desperately deserve. She is still out there, her heart is still beating, and the device inside her chest is still keeping count, waiting for the day when its story can finally be told. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth investigation on time and crime. This case is active and ongoing, and there will be further developments. To ensure you stay informed and to support our commitment to factual, responsible true crime reporting, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We will continue to follow the search for Nancy Guthrie and bring you any significant updates as they become available.